Welcome back to Proxhammer, everybody, and today we are going to take a first glance, basically first impressions of the new Eldar Codex. Today we're only going to be looking at the Craftworld section, though, just because, you know, this book is pretty massive. You know, there's a Harlequin section and a Ynnari section as well, so we're only going to be looking at the Craftworld section in this video. So I just want to mention real quick right off the bat that when I was starting to look through this codex, there was a couple things that jumped out to me. And one of the things is that basically, if you look at how the book is laid out in general, it's a lot more streamlined than it's ever been. So all of the units and stratagems seem to work and synergize better together than the previous codex ever did. So in the previous codex, a lot of the choices were pretty obvious what you would take. The Exarch Powers especially were pretty obvious. You were going to take pretty much the same ones regardless. But in this codex, it's a lot, there's a lot more harder choices, and those choices can match better into a lot of different types of lists that people can build. So there's not one correct answer with a lot of the units in the book. All right, so let's get into the army-wide special rules. And I'm going to say this right now. I love the new army-wide special rules and how they are. The new battle focus is immensely better. And the Strands of Fate is a really good ability as well. So my thing with the Ancient Doom special rule back in the day, the army-wide special rule, was that it was really hard to utilize and oftentimes useless unless you were facing Slaanesh. And even then, I have to be honest, the anti-Slaanesh tech wasn't the best, even when you were facing them. In my opinion, Eldar have never had a big problem dealing with Slaaneshi armies. So the fact that it gave them bonuses against an army that they were already really good against was kind of useless. Strands of Fate's really powerful. Basically allows you to have extra rerolls every turn, which is awesome. And Battle Focus, of course, moving after shooting. Also really invaluable as far as a special rule goes. And the cool thing about Battle Focus is there's a lot of utility with it. There's a lot of different things you can do with it, with a lot of the different units, and it synergizes well with some of the stratagems that we've gotten in this edition as well. The one thing about Battle Focus I will say, though, is that moving through terrain with Battle Focus is not good. So, for example, if you want to move through terrain, area terrain with Battle Focus, that dice roll is going to be at a -3, so it's pretty oppressive. So when you are planning your moves and so forth, you have to be careful and make sure that when you use your Battle Focus, you're either using a stratagem to boost it to the maximum distance, or you're using it outside of area terrain. And yeah, basically a good way to use this is to skirt around terrain. That way you force the enemy to move through it, but you don't have to move through it yourself. Now, I know the old codex also had Craftworld Traits and Custom Craftworld Traits, but I'm just going to say this right now. The new Custom Craftworld Traits are fantastic. So there's a couple of small nerfs to some of the old ones that were OP, but in general, they're really good. And actually, believe it or not, the actual preset Craftworld Traits are really strong too, if you adhere to a certain play style. So for example, if you go with the Iandan Craftworld, and you choose a lot of, Wraith Lords and Wraith Guard and things like that, you're going to have a really strong list, and it's going to make you very, very, tough. Or if you choose a, I hope I say this right, an Elodic list, Elodic, I think they're called, the Ranger Craftworld, basically, your Rangers and nearly all of your units with the Outcast keyword are going to be amazing. And they're going to be able to do a lot of cool things like, for example, shoot twice in a turn, be able to shoot right out at the end of the movement phase and then shoot again in the shooting phase, if I'm reading that rule right. So basically able to do a bunch of different things and ambush targets and stuff like that. Kind of plays to an Alpha Strike play style. Very effective if you're using the correct units. And I have to give a special shout out to two custom Craftworld traits, the Headstrong trait and the Hail of Doom trait. Headstrong allows you to reroll charge distances, which is amazing and much needed. And the advance rolls as well are rerolled. And Hail of Doom is one of the powers that is going to greatly benefit from the increased ability of the shuriken catapults and shuriken weapons. And yeah, rolls of a 6 to hit, automatically wounding and counting as a 6 to wound means that all of your shuriken weapons that roll a 6 to hit are essentially going to A, auto wound, and B, because it's a 6, it counts as a 6 to wound, it's going to be at an additional -2 armor modifier. Wow. Okay, so this has a lot of synergies, obviously, with a lot of our different units, but especially Dire Avengers, which are one of the new OP units that I really think is going to benefit from a lot of the stratagems and abilities that shuriken weapons have now. And furthermore, I think that Dire Avengers are going to be one of the most OP units in the Eldar Codex just because of the amount of strategies that they're going to, or stratagems and abilities that they're going to have, and the amount of raw damage they can push out with their new Avenger Shuriken catapults is really going to be quite something to see on the tabletop. And as for the stratagems themselves, we have two in particular that also benefit Dire Avengers. So Blade Storm, which basically gives Dire Avengers, I think if they roll a 6 to hit, I think they get an additional attack, if I believe, that auto hits. So for example, if you roll a 6 to hit, you're generating another auto hit. So pretty useful. And then you have the Avengers of Azurian, which means that if the unit is below its starting strength, so let's say that, you have 7 or even 8 Dire Avengers left in a unit, then you can fire twice. Now, this is situational because obviously you don't want to waste the command points if it's just like 3 Dire Avengers left or something like that. But, it's there in case, you only lose 1 or 2. You can use it and really do a lot of damage. And overall, with stratagems, there's been a few nerfs. They've been kind of small. For example, Fire and Fade has been nerfed, increase of command points of 1, but otherwise pretty much unchanged, other than you can't use it to embark in a transport and stuff like that. So still useful in certain circumstances, might not be always useful, and might not be used every turn. And most of the stratagems, other than that, there's a lot of the same stuff. So players that are used to the older stratagems are still going to be familiar with a lot of those. And one of the stratagems I also want to point out that I think is useful is the Swooping Barrage, or I think it's called the Swooping Barrage, but it's basically the Swooping Hawk Grenade Pack stratagem, where if a unit of Swooping Hawks moves over an enemy unit, it can drop bombs on them. These are very effective. These are much more effective than the old rules, where you had to kind of use a lot of tactics and strategy to pull it off. And in this version of the Swooping Hawk Grenade Pack, you basically roll 1 dice for each Swooping Hawk. And on a 4+, that unit suffers a mortal wound, up to a maximum of 6. So if you have a unit of 5 Swooping Hawks, you're flying over an enemy unit or character, you're going to be basically doing 5 mortal wounds. If it's a character that's not a vehicle or monster, then you're going to be doing it at -1. So pretty good way of assassinating characters and getting the last few wounds on something. And I have to say, though, this is not as good as it was before. So Swooping Hawks have taken a hit with their Swooping Hawk Grenade Pack, but where they've gained is in their shooting attack and in their maneuverability, which is unsurpassable now. Basically, Sky Leap allows them to just fly all over the battlefield at a whim. So it's kind of crazy, but I'll go into that more when I go over the unit overview of Swooping Hawks. So on to the psychic powers. To be honest with everybody, I found the psychic powers portion a little bit lacking. And the reason for this is because I discovered that most of the psychic powers are the same, if not a little bit worse than they were before. So, for example, Guide used to be 24 inches. Now it's 18 inches, with the exception that if you roll over a 10 on the psyche test, it becomes 24 inches. And is the same for pretty much every psychic power on the Runes of Fate. So with the exception that some powers do a little more damage if you roll over a 10. But in any case, Mind War, still kind of sucks. Executioner, still not the greatest psychic ability that deals mortal wounds. So Eldar are still firmly, and this is fine, but Eldar are still firmly the masters of the buff and debuff game. And as far as offense, psychic powers, Eldar are just going to be lacking in that category. But the good news is we don't have to rely on that at all, because a lot of our units are just so effective at dealing with their current targets now. They're specialized targets that we don't need to worry about dealing mortal wounds as much as we used to be. And the Runes of Battle and Runes of Fortune are mostly unchanged as well. A couple of nerfs here and there. And a few minor buffs, if I'm not mistaken, on some of the psychic powers to make them more usable in this edition with the current rule set. But yeah, essentially mostly unchanged, which was kind of a disappointment. I was expecting really cool psychic powers. I was expecting, Executioner to actually execute something. But, not the case. But that's okay. We still have the best buffs in the game. And without further ado, let's get into the coolness that is the Exarch Powers. So I'm just going to say these are fantastic. So a couple of changes with the Exarch Powers. One, taking an Exarch Power gives your Exarch extra stats. Gives them an extra wound, gives them an extra ballistic skill, and if it's if it's a shooting Exarch, it's a ballistic skill, and if it's a close combat Exarch, it's an extra attack for your stat line, which is really, really good. It's really impactful, and the new Exarch powers, which I'll go into more in depth in another video, some of them suck, I'm going to be honest. There's ones that you're not going to take very much, but mostly all of them are impactful, and they modify the unit's strengths in a particular way that makes that unit more effective at whatever role you want to have that unit do within its specialization. So, for example, if you want your Dire Avenger unit to be an objective secured unit and you want it to function like a troop choice, like it used to be, by the way, Dire Avengers are elites now, if I haven't mentioned that already, they are going to function exactly like they were troops. If you want them to do a lot of damage, there's an Exarch power for that gives them the -2 to armor penetration on 5+ instead of 6+ to wound. And lastly, if you want your Dire Avengers to stick into combat with an enemy unit, there's an Exarch power that allows them to shoot while engaged, even when friendly models are also within that same combat. So pretty useful. The last one's not as useful in my opinion, but the second two are definitely great powers. And honestly, the same with a lot of the Exarch powers. They're all pretty useful in some way. Some are better than others, obviously, but all of them have value as far as their points cost. Now, obviously, as we play more, we'll learn which Exarch powers are the best and which ones are the most mathematically beneficial, point for point. But until then, all of them look pretty cool and all of them are useful. Unlike the old Exarch powers, which some of them were completely, utterly useless. For example, the Warp Spiders have an ability that they used to have, basically, called the Spider's Lair. And the Spider's Lair ability used to be kind of not great. It was good in certain circumstances when you were fighting with a lot of terrain or a city fight or something like that. But on a lot of boards, it just wasn't that great. Now it's excellent. Now it's an excellent denial ability where you can use it to kind of deny an area of the board for your opponent. Again, I would personally rather use the other two Exarch powers for the Warp Spiders, but it is useful, I have to say. Especially if you're facing an assault-oriented army, that ability, that Exarch power can be absolutely the difference between losing a game and winning a game, just denying a piece of the board for the enemy that they have to get an objective on or something like that. So very useful overall. The only downside to this new Exarch power thing is that you can't have duplicate Exarch powers. So once you have a unit with an Exarch power, you can't choose that same power. And as for the Eldar heavy weapons and special weapons and all the war gear, pretty much all of it has had some sort of stat or ability increase. So I'm talking about everything from the heavy Wraith Cannon of the Wraith Knight is so much better now, to the lowly, humble Shuriken Catapult, which now has an 18-inch range. All of it is better. All of it. And there's a lot of different buffs to the specialized war gear, like the Last Blaster. Being able to auto-wound on 6s to hit is really effective and great. And, you know, that's really good against low armor, you know, high toughness, you know, creatures, kind of like Tyrannid, which we're going to need some Swooping Hawks when the new Tyrannid Codex comes out in probably a couple months. And just a myriad of different buffs to all the weapons in every single aspect, all the way from the Banshees to the Striking Scorpions, etc. It's all great. And maybe a more unsung part of the actual, you know, book is the fact that most, if not mostly all the relics are better in some way. So either the weapons do more damage or the abilities do, you know, they're more effective. Whatever it is, the relics are better, and there's many more options of relics across all different craft worlds. So it's really awesome to choose one now. It really actually does feel like a choice now. And what I mean by that is, you know, before when you had the choice of relic, it was always the Spirit Stone, or no, what was it called? It was called the Phoenix Gem, sorry. So it was called the Phoenix Gem. So the Phoenix Gem was the auto include in most armies. Now, the Phoenix Gem is still fantastic. Don't get me wrong. He got buffed as well. But now, you know, if you want to do a little more damage with weapons, you can. And speaking of damage, when we go over to the Warlord traits, a lot of the Warlord traits are actually much better too. As far as keeping your Farseer, your Autarch alive. So one in particular that I really like is one that basically says, okay, once per turn, if you fail a save, you can count that damage, that attack's damage, as 0. That is insane. That's a great way to keep your HQ, your Warlord, alive. And while other Warlord traits boost damage and give minor auras, the one I really like now is Seer of the Shifting Vector. So you might be asking yourself, well, I mean, it's not as good as it was. And that's true. It's not, in a way. But every time your opponent uses a command point, you can roll a dice, and on 6, you get a command point. So it's a way to regenerate command points throughout the battle. And this can be really useful in the long term. And actually, you can pretty much replicate the old rule of Seer of the Shifting Vector with command points if you think about it and strategically plan. So it's not straight up as good, don't get me wrong, but it has a lot more versatility, especially if you consider that, you know, command points are probably something that Eldar are going to have trouble getting. You know, I mean, Imperial Guard, other armies like that, cheaper armies are going to be able to field much more troops. So for Eldar to have an ability to regain command points like this throughout the battle, it's actually really useful. It means we can use more stratagems and things like that, more action. So it's going to be really helpful over a long, you know, game. And I can't wait to try it out because, you know, I mean, we have a lot of new stratagems that are actually really effective. So yeah, so that's going to be really fun to try. And then there's a couple of other Warlord traits that are pretty good as well. As for the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of the Codex, the actual units are much improved. So they do have an increased cost, but in general, the increased cost is offset by their effectiveness. So, for example, Striking Scorpions are miles and miles and miles better than they were at assassinating targets. They're still good at assassinating. They're just much better at it, and they can also deal with other enemy types as well. And I have to say, once again, there is borderline many OP combinations that can be used with Eldar with the right stratagems and so forth. A lot of Eldar now have abilities where if they roll a 6 to hit or wound, they get something special. And this is army-wide. This isn't just because of Shuriken Catapults or whatever. This is army-wide, and because there's so many different reroll options now for Eldar and so many additions to hit and wound, It's just going to be really strong. I mean, I think the math on it's going to speak for itself. I'm going to do some number crunching over the week and over this weekend to try to figure out which units are the most effective at dealing with certain targets. That will be coming shortly, but you know, in general, the units are much better. The stat lines are improved, and the cost is only a couple more points typically per model. Sometimes it's more, but typically that's the normal. And another great thing about the new codex is actually, believe it or not, the special characters. I can't believe I'm saying this, but a lot of the special characters and Phoenix Lords and things like that are actually useful in a lot of different compositions. So, for example, if you were going to go heavy on Dire Avengers, a Zerman would be an actually great choice to go with. Or if you're going to do more Swooping Hawks, again, because of their Skyleap ability, that's also a good pick. Eldrad Uthran is also very good. You know, and the only thing I will say about some of the named characters is that, yes, you do have to do that craft world. But if you are playing that craft world, there's really no, you know, reason not to take Eldrad. He's a great character for that army. Same thing with Prince Riel. He is better. He doesn't suck anymore. He's pretty good, especially if you're taking Corsair units. He's really effective. And just in general, the special characters are better. So in conclusion, I think the key points of this book is really this. They fine-tuned Eldar to be able to play to their strengths much more effectively. So, you know, from your army-wide special rules and stratagems, they've tweaked things to make the army perform better over the course of a long game. They've improved a lot of the special weapons and heavy weapons and things like that, and a lot of the units actually make more sense against the targets that they're supposed to be good against. And also, you know, Eldar still have a lot of the cool gimmicks that made them awesome before. So I haven't really seen a lot of, you know, changes in that. A few of the gimmicks have obviously been nerfed and changed and so forth that I've gone over before. But there's a lot of new ones, too, that are going to be really effective. And Eldar have always been about combination play. And, you know, through their secondary objectives and things like that, this really solidifies that role for the faction. And, you know, overall, I get a really strong feeling from the Codex, and I have to be honest with you guys. I think one of the things that's going to be different about the Eldar coming up is when people start to play them, they're going to hate playing against them because they have so many cool special rules and so many combinations. If you are an experienced Eldar player, you're really going to have a great time with this new Codex. On the other hand, though, I do think Eldar are going to be, you know, a faction that works best in the hands of an experienced player or a player who really takes their time and tries to remember a lot of stuff. Because, to be honest with you, there's a lot of stuff to remember in the Codex. So unless you are well studied on the Codex and the rules and stuff like that, it's going to be very hard to play them to their maximum efficiency. And that's fine. They've always been an experienced player's army, but this continues. So if you are a new player getting into Eldar, be patient with them. Don't just give them a couple games and say, oh, these guys suck. You know, the new Codex is bad. I'm going to move on. Give it a chance. Try to look at some of the potential combinations that you can do with the units and try to build your lists accordingly. Remember, Eldar are like a well-oiled machine. They're not a lot of separate parts. They're one army working together to dismantle and destroy your opponent. And lastly, of course, I think it's safe to say with this Codex that it is a vast improvement over the old book in a number of ways, with very few exceptions. One of those exceptions being the psychic power section, which is not as good as it used to be, but still pretty good in general. So mostly the same. All right, everybody, that's it for today. I hope you guys learned something in this video. I have some more videos coming out within the next week discussing more advanced tactics and things like that. So stay tuned. We're going to have more videos coming up in regards to that. And I think the next video will probably be a video about battle focus. I want to put that out there and kind of briefly mention it and kind of go over some of the little tricks and things you can do and how to use it and things like that. And then in the future, there'll be a more advanced hands-on video about the best ways battle focus can be used for our different units. Have a great one, everybody. I'll see you guys next time.